Okay, so you may have seen, oops, let me click the little button there. You may have seen the, what was it? The write-up or the synopsis of what I was going to talk about. Okay, we're good. Well, I just wanted to go through it quickly, and just remind everybody that we're really talking about leadership. That's what I wanted to bring up. And when people think about leaders, different things come to mind. I used to be the executive director of New Leaders for New Schools in the Western region. So at New Leaders, we had the opportunity to train people how to be leaders in school systems, and that included, central office, but mostly principals and teacher leaders, grade level chairs, whatever. And I did that for about 5 years, and it's phenomenal. You need to have leaders in buildings. However, what I often found is that people think of a leader as like a position or a title. Like the chief academic officer is a leader, and obviously the superintendent, and maybe the chair of the board or whatever. Those are leaders. But what I tried to get people to understand is, if you need a sign above your door that says you're a leader, to be a leader, you're probably not a leader. It's not a position necessarily. Your credibility doesn't lie in your position that way. There are some other things that play, and I want to go through some of that stuff today and lift up some opportunities that people can put in. All right, let's go. And the reality is, if we're going to move literacy instruction to the outcomes we want for kids and the adults who serve kids, we have to have good quality leadership. If or else this will just go in, another initiative in a dustbin, and nothing will come of it. All right, let's go. So I'm gonna start off with asking this quick question, and if you don't mind, rather than doing a poll, I just ask you to populate the chat. How did you learn to read? Very quickly, how did you learn to read? And I'm gonna ask that you pick one of these things. We can call the first one, A, second one B, C, and D, right? A, B, C, or D. So if you don't remember, you don't remember. Fine. That's actually a thing. And then you see the various categories there. May have learned it in school, but don't really remember how you learned it. Maybe you were taught step by step, but it was hard, really hard. And for some, not only was it hard, but you needed certain supports, whether it's special services or some diagnostic support. And if you don't feel comfortable putting it in there, that's fine. But those who do, if you don't mind, A, B, C, or D, I'd really quickly just like to see how that distribution breaks down. Okay. I see lots of B's, a couple of A's, I see a couple of C's. Very interesting. Someone says my mother. My mom would approve of that. Okay. Thank you for being so responsive, first of all. This is great. You guys are on it. I love this group. This group was fun. Mostly B, you can look at the chat for yourself. Mostly B's, but some A's. I see one D and a couple of C's. Okay. That is, and that's enough. That is basically, if I could have predicted it, I would have predicted it being that. Because what we found out is that that's kind of the breakdown of things. Right? This comes from Pelletier and Mary Wintersteen. But I like this graphic. I remember I used to use Nancy Young's old ladder of reading, her former version, but I've shifted to this because I think it really does kind of make the point I'm trying to make. So that A group, that's the yellow. Really, there's some folks who they don't really know how they learn to read. They really don't. It happens, right? And some of us think, oh well, it must be a natural process. And then there's the 20 to 30% or so, or 35% of folks who, like they learned it in school, but they're not quite sure what the instruction. You hear people say, well, there's no one way to teach reading, and that's the blue group. You're right. There's no one way. Right. Then there's other folks who, they need it explicitly taught, and it's to be systematic. And within that, you have the dyslexic folks. So this whole issue of leadership is really this. How do you, in a system where most of us who work in schools are in the yellow and blue group, right? That's most of us. It just is. How do you get to the orange folks? How do you, the people in the yellow and blue, we're the ones in schools. We've survived, we've navigated the intricacies and the systems and all that. And so now all the training and the philosophies and coaching and the staffing and curriculum and everything else, it's like we're the ones picking it. And it's like humidity, like you don't know you're in it unless you're out of it. Like that, if those are your categories, how do we make sure that the other folks, the majority of folks, are getting what they need? And embedded in that, you have those who are dyslexic. Now, I would submit to you all today that like this is not the way. Hey, these are the actual strategies. So this is like the point of the whole thing. I'll go into it more later and more slides, pick out rooms. If you get anything out of today, just know that the question for leadership is, how can we get the people who it may not come naturally to, like the people who are in blue and yellow, how do we get them, because they're running the show, how do we get them to incorporate, how do we lead them out of that mindset, out of that frame of reference to serve the greatest number of people when it may not be what they needed? And so the frame of reference may be different than what the folks in orange need. That's the leadership challenge. Because to be clear, these techniques here, like this is not best practice from a leadership perspective, having taught leadership, these are not best practice. And some of you may laugh. I see some people say may laugh, but the reality is this is kind of what we do. To shift people, this is the ennui. This is the style that's in vogue today. I will yell at you, I will berate you, I will moralize, I will pontificate, I will just move on, right? By myself, without you. And that passes for leadership. And so what I'm going to submit to you is that's not. I mean, it's a form of leadership, fine. Okay, fine. I'm sure that shame, but that's a tough strategy to employ if you're trying to actually win people over. And you say, well, I'm not a leader. Well, actually, educators by definition are leaders. The word educator actually means leader. The root of it is educo or educare, right? Here's my structured literacy coming into play. But duco means to lead. That's where you get Duke of Earl. Shout out to my dad, who was a doo-wop singer. I love singing the Duke of Earl. Duco, right, or ducare, and then or e means out of. So to educate literally means we're leading something or someone out of. Now the question is, where are you leading them to, and what are you leading them out of? And I would submit that a lot of it is our own mindset, our own beliefs, our own point of view, and someone has to be gracious enough, skilled enough to take the time and energy to lead us out of where we're at to somewhere else. Okay, that's just what an educator. The point of that is just to say, all educators are leaders by definition. Whether you're leading a group of kids or you're leading your grade level team or your school building or whatever it is, like that's the job, that's the role. Same with parents. Parents are educators. They're leading kids out of a state of one state of development to another stage of development. And we could go on, school board members, superintendents, et cetera. Okay, let's keep going. So what about successful leadership? And you can slot these things in there, right? Leaders move people from X to Y, whatever that place is, X to Y. The question is, how do we get people to do that? How do we get people to actually lead? Or how do we move people? And there are a lot of different ways. And let's just, I mean, look, we're here. Let's just be honest. We all have our default settings. I know some people who are equity minded, driven, love the babies, by their peers, and they believe in that fourth one, forcing. They honestly believe it's a waste of time. Force people to move from place X to place Y. And they want to get in a position of authority so that they can force people to do some things. And they think that's leadership. And I'm thinking of one person in particular. I adore her, love her, and that's 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 a form of leadership. But in this moment, when we're talking about literacy, I would submit to you all, not only is it not the only way, but it's one of the least effective ways to get people where they need to go. If you're trying to avoid these things, right? If you're trying to avoid people becoming cynical, and if you want to make sure that you're creating culture, you can do it. But if you do it that way, there's going to be some repercussions. You want to figure out how to do it, or we should figure out how to do it in a way that's sustainable. That once we're gone, if things still keeps going. That's 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 a kind of leadership that we would call change management, getting people to change when they really don't have. They really don't. You can say should all you want to, but we're not talking about should. There's an element of moralism with should. So we're just talking. So I'm gonna give you an example. Oakland Unified School District. My born in Oakland, raised in Richmond, and I've worked in Oakland schools for about classroom and as a principal and some other stuff. And Oakland was terrible. Just we were not teaching kids to read. And then, I mean, literally, when I got there, the curriculum was do what you want, when you want, how you want. That was the curriculum, if we're going to be honest. And many school districts echo that today. And then we had a superintendent and his administration come in. His name was Jonas. He was the first superintendent in Oakland. And he came in and he said, he and his team said, we're going to use structural literacy. He didn't use structural literacy. He didn't use that word, but he, whatever the jargon was back then, we're going to do it. We're going to teach kids to read step by step. We're going to use this program. It's called Open Court. People hated it. Oh my gosh, we hated it. I was a teacher. We hated it. Not all of us. I didn't hate it, but many people did because he didn't. He just did it. Just rammed it down our throats. Well, that's what it felt like. There wasn't the change management applied strategically, and so people experienced it as being a burden and disrespectful. All the things. Now, when that happened, student achievement went up. Kids started to read. Okay, 7 years in a row, biggest and most improved urban district in California. This is a big deal. Big deal. And he was immune from some of the stuff because he was a Latino man, as a minority, and people are a little bit hesitant to just go all in on a Latino superintendent. But eventually, it was like death by 1,000 cuts. Eventually, he left, right? And once he and his team left, it wasn't that long, 3-4 years, he left. And guess what happened? Because the buy-in never was there. The adaptive leadership moves never were applied. They threw it out and went with units of study, the Lucy Caucus. They threw it out, went with Lucy. The balanced literacy framework became the thing. And I left the classroom, went to administration right around that time. But and we didn't even keep the green foundational skills section in the old open core stuff. And now Oakland has 11 of the 75 lowest schools in California for reading, third grade reading. Right. So when people talk about the pendulum, this is a pendulum. No, it's not a pendulum. It's just that the people who led the charge and the shift towards structural literacy didn't apply leadership, adaptive leadership. They were nearsighted, and so when they left, we want to avoid that. Is the bottom line with this? It's not the goal, and it really isn't a pendulum. So I'm going to put this up really quickly, and I'd like you to do this first quick activity. Instead of going to a breakout room, let's just try to do it here. I think the numbers are. Actually, we will go to breakout. We'll go to breakout for about 5 minutes. But let me talk through it first. So the American Federation of Teachers for the last 20 some odd years has stated that these are the elements of an effective. Okay, they've got 5 of them. It's on their website today. There's a link at the bottom. You can go there. They say these are the things you got to have, and they're spot on. And I know for some people this is a surprise because they don't think of unions as being progressive. Or let me tell you something. AFT has been a leader in this for decades, but there's so much noise. There's so much animus and rancor and politicization of everything else that people don't really care about the positions. But on this position, they are spot on. Okay, so I'm going to go through these, and I'd like for you to ask yourself in your context, how many of these elements are in place in your context? And then when you go to the breakout rooms, you can discuss it with each other and start with a number: 3 out of 5, 2 out of 5, 5 out of 5, etc. The first one is a curriculum that's based in the science. It has all 5 of those pillars: awareness, phonics, vocabulary, fluency, comprehension. I mean, you can also talk about oral language development and writing, but you got to have these 5. That's what the National Reading Panel says. That's what the research says, looking on Hattie's learning, et cetera. That's what it says. And the curriculum is delivered by knowledgeable teachers, and it's explicit, systematic, core instruction. That means tier 1, not tier 3, not tier 2. We don't just do, SIPs in the intervention room. Like, core classroom instruction has these things. That's 1. So ask yourself, is that 1? Do you have that one? 2, in your context, what about the profession? There is nothing worse on God's green earth than bad professional development. Oh my God. High quality professional development means it's so good that we actually don't grade papers during them, right? Because it's so good. It's aligned to the curriculum. It's what we need. Whether it's given by the district or school administrator, but it's high quality PD on early reading instruction. You have that one. So that's 2. The third one, are all your materials aligned with the research? So this isn't just the core curriculum. This is all your materials. Whether they be your assessments, whether they be your books, whether they, is your library organized by level? That's not what the research says. No, doesn't say that. There should be scaffolds to allow us to get kids to where they need to be so they can always have access to the content and not be, consigned to the margins of class by giving a low level book. So that, are your materials aligned with the research? That's the third one. And the fourth one, what about your assessments? Are they appropriate? Do we screen kids for risk of reading failure? Some screen for dyslexia, others just screen for a broader category of reading difficulties. Fine. And is there regular progress monitoring in place, or do we have a way to go model? So that's the fourth one. The fifth one is intervention timely for all kids, right? For those who need it. So that means I'm not waiting. I'm doing checkups and not a postmortem. Regularly scheduled, like the intervention is on time. We don't have the 2-year gap model where you say, well, they've got to get 2 years behind before. So you've got these 5 things. How many of those are in place in your setting? And when you have that number, 1 out of 5, 5 out of 5, I'd like you to identify one that is not in place. No. We want to build each other's practice. So think about the one that you do have in place in your system and share how you all do that. Okay, that's the prompt. And if I could get some help sending people to the breakout room really quickly, give them a number. Is it 5 out of 5, 1, 2, 3, or 4? And then what's one of the ones that you do have in place, if you have any of these things in place, and what makes it, and how's it going? That one that you've chosen. So would you all do that, please? And we'll come back and let's give it 5. Okay.
Okay, I'm sending everyone to breakout rooms now.
Everybody knows we had the best group. Just to be clear. Oh, we had Amanda. Who else did we have in our group? We had one person who was just a mystery and their square just remained dark, whatever. but everybody else was engaged and talked about it. Actually, if you don't mind, I'd actually like to hear from a couple of people from those groups. And now that I've bragged on the group I was in, I guess I probably should have one of us go first. Sorry, guys. If either of you want to kind of give a sense, as Angelica or Amanda, about kind of what you heard from people, that would be very, very helpful.
All right. I'm Angie, by the way. This says Angelica on the, or Angelica. You see Angelica. It's pronounced Angelica. I go by Angie. So in our particular group, it appeared that most of us at least had 1 to 2 pretty strongly in place. And it was a variety. If you guys can correct me if I'm not accurate in that, but there was a couple of things that we had that were in place. None of us had all 5, and,
Right.
and somewhere between 2, maybe even up to 3, but it was right around 2.
Yeah.
We had a discussion in our group about, out of those 5 areas, what might we prioritize if we were going to tackle those. And what came out of that was professional development that was not just focused on curriculum, but was focused on specific strategies and ways to help teachers improve teaching reading. The next one was making sure we had good curriculum in place. And those 2 are the kind of the top 2, because that second one, curriculum, should have in place good assessment as well. So we talked about all of those. Am I missing anything?
No, you pretty much hit it. Thank
Okay.
you. Much appreciated. You want to take over? I'll give you the con. You can go. Great job. Appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I will also say that that we have to be honest about our situations. Everyone's got great things happening in their school building. Most of us, right? Sure. And there's no shame in having gaps or deficits, but we have to be square, like flat-footed, foursquare, and just name where we're at. And so when people talk about a pendulum swinging, I'm like, well, how can you swing if you don't have 5 of these things? Like, you don't have a pendulum, you just have a little string that you're dangling. There's no, like, you've only 5 out of 5. I mean, we've got these things in place. And this is, that bastion of reform-minded progressiveness, AFT. I say that tongue in cheek because it's not really, they just tell it like it is. And these things aren't controversial for the most part. They're not. The only thing I would say is maybe for strong curriculum, you should also throw in or make sure that you have a writing component, or language development component. Like, okay, fine. But these are the things. And we could talk and go to conferences and do all the things we want to. But at the end of the day, can we lead people out of where they are to a place where they're doing these things consistently? Yeah. Liza, I see you have a hand raised. Did you want to?
I just wanted to share something from my group that I thought was a really good question. We had 2 Keeleys in our group, by the way, which I thought was pretty auspicious. One of the people in our group asked, was really saying that their district was pretty strong in 4 of the buckets, but not in PD. And my question to you on behalf of our group is, would you recommend that would be overall PD for the whole sort of district, one size fits all in, Orton Gillingham or in letters or something like that, or more a la carte PD at all, where teachers and leaders and people feel like they need? And how would you organize that for most effectiveness?
So when we talk about PD, there's 2 different kinds of PD. Of course, there's the curriculum PD, that whatever curriculum you've got, they've got some stuff that, training on how to use it. Fine, that's great. And oftentimes it's aligned to the science of reading, wonderful. But that's not going to get you where you need to be. It's not going to get your kids or your educators where you need to be. You've got to also provide resources and opportunity for other professional development And I highly recommend having a portfolio of options of aligned PD. Now, the downside of that is that it's great to have everybody walk in lockstep. We went to the same meeting, the same conference. We have the same manual. Everybody turn to page 2, whatever. That's what in our, when I was in central office, like that's the mindset. And if you're not doing that, then really, what are you doing? Right? You can't have 10 people doing 10 different things. It'll be crazy. And that's our fear talking. We're talking about adaptive leadership. We're talking about leadership in general. And here's the reality is that people are in different places in their lives. You've got some PD, like you can go to a Orton Gillingham training, I know, letters or Orton Gillingham, and they will offer you graduate level credit for that class because it's so robust and the reading is so dense. Or you go to core training, Consortium of Reading Excellence. Phenomenal training, asynchronous, online, great. And not everybody's there. Somebody, there's the reality of life. Some people may have just had a kid. Some people are tired. Some people, like whatever the thing is, and some people may not actually believe in this stuff. So what you have to have something on the menu that they can opt into and engage and come along without going to the graduate level class right away. And you have people at various levels of experience. So for example, the Reading League has classes like 3-hour classes. You can go to AIM pathways. Like you have to provide a variety of options. If you don't, you have got a certain profile of educator who will go to that graduate level class right away. You send that email, they sign up. And wonderful, that's great. But you're not going to get this thing off the ground and get people to own it unless you get the vast majority of folks heading in the same direction. That means you had to figure out what to offer people who are not necessarily fully bought in or who don't have that much time or at a place. And so I would offer that. You should have a portfolio, a menu of options. And let's be honest, these things take time. And so unless you're going to embed that in your system or your school professional development pathway for the year, if you want this to be an extra thing, well, then you have to treat it like an extra thing. I know some people, and this is where my urgent people like flip out. Oh my God, educators should run to do these trainings because it's the right thing to do. Okay, yes, and how far will that get you? You have to value people's time and say, we have this portfolio of options. We're headed in this direction as a system, but we know that we can only do this within the contract hours, or, within the, so we're going to pay you for your time. We're going to give you this, and maybe the different options have different amounts of compensation. That's worth raising money from sources, from the community, from foundations, from whatever. Raise money for that. Does that make sense? So I would. That's how I would answer that. And now I saw someone with their hand raised up. I don't want to mispronounce your name. It looks like is it Edoug Eduje, or what is that name? Well, you're up. You have to unmute yourself though.
Sorry, it wasn't letting me unmute myself. Can you guys hear me?
We can.
So it's my first name's Elizabeth. It just is only showing my last name, but we discussed that professional development was our area that we felt was of most concern. And I shared that typically I'm a dyslexia specialist. So every year I typically will train our psych interns on dyslexia and effective reading strategies for dyslexia. And I implemented a structured literacy program into my classroom. And so I was asked to train teachers on structured literacy and effective reading strategies for children with learning disabilities. Mm-hmm. Well, it didn't go so well because we implemented this training in January. Mm-hmm. And considering the climate that we were in educationally at that time, teachers were really worn out. They had just gone through the exhausting challenges associated with distance learning. And it was just a really rough year. And so implementing a professional development program in January, we didn't get a lot of teacher buy-in. And quite frankly, I don't blame the teachers. They were exhausted. And so understanding timing and understanding the needs of teachers was just something that we really talked about. We felt that we had effective programs, but those programs weren't always district-wide. So what I use in my classroom, everyone's not necessarily using. And so those two things were our barriers that we had identified.
I'm so glad you said that, Elizabeth, because everything in the right season. And if you, for example, and listen, I love letters training. I love Ward Gillingham training. Love it. But if that's what you're offering in the middle of a pandemic, when people are burnt out, you will lose people. You will lose, as my daughter says, as she struggled with dyslexia, later on she said, "Dad, there's more than one way to drop out." She showed up every day to school. She did all the things, but emotionally, she disinvested from school completely. And a lot of our teachers, you run the risk of them being there, present. They'll sign their name, but they're not there. So that's why we really have to be mindful, not just of the timing, but then also what we're offering them. So what if a teacher said, if you said, "Listen, here's an option, reading league, intro to the science of reading, or whatever it is, or dyslexia training, 3 hours. We can do it during our Wednesday professional developments over a course of 2 weeks. And so I'm going to release you. I'm going to release those of you who choose that. I'm going to release you from our weekly PD. You're going to go do that for whatever the time is." So it's not an extra thing, because if you don't consider that, the message you're sending is you're disconnected and they're alone. And there's nothing worse than having change foisted upon you and you're alone. It is terrifying. Okay, I'll take one more group before we move on. I see some other people have come on. Good to see you all. I see the esteemed Dr. Burke there. Good to see you, Dr. Burke. I should call on you like you do me sometimes. I won't. Any other group really quickly want to say how many? How about Keely's group? Keely, do you remember in general, what was the consensus in your group about how many of these things did they have going on in their school building? There you go.
Perfect. Thank you. For some reason, it wasn't letting me unmute. I think the senses of what we've already talked about, just the training, especially after the pandemic, just that the focus is elsewhere. And there's been, without training, a lot of things pushed into what we need to teach or adapt, or with curriculum, Canvas, different avenues of what tools we're using. But I think, yeah, that would be the primary for our group as well. But like we were just discussing, I think that has, but just pushing it at a certain time, because yeah, people are overwhelmed and it's very overwhelming. And I think people are just trying to do what they can each day. And when you add all this extra stuff, it can be very overwhelming.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Well,
I'd just like to add that we put together a module on professional learning. I don't think we have it posted yet, but it should be posted really soon. That just talks about some of the things you all have talked about. And then Lead for Literacy also has some mini modules on it as well. So some good resources.
well, hurry up, Lisa.
We just finished editing them.
All right, thank you. Okay, let's move on. Let's move on. So that was a good exercise, I think, not just because we got a chance to engage each other, but also, like, they're very clear. These are bread and butter things. Now, I know when people think of reform, they think of so far out, but this is bread and butter stuff. And so when people start talking about a pendulum swinging one way or the other, you got to stop them and say, "Hey, wait a second. These are core things. And where are we at with these things?" If we've never actually done these things, the pendulum has never swung in the first place. So that's why, part of the leadership stance is framing, because that dissonance is coming. Oh, this is just pendulum. Okay. So you have to be able to navigate that. All right, let's keep. I'd also recommend that you take a look and listen to, a couple of sources. You can point people to the Trust podcast, Extraordinary Districts. You can have people just go listen and extract meaning, actions that were taken from a variety of districts in a variety of contexts, how they transitioned to structured literacy and the results that they got, and just map it out. Plus, it's a fun activity. I'll skip this one. But there are examples out there. You can just have people go look at different examples. Okay, so now let's shift to, unfortunately, sometimes it's not always the case. There's poor leadership. And, you know, I have my colleague that I had mentioned earlier, I challenge her often and I say, listen, I understand your hunger to support children, right? But I love you enough to challenge you that you cannot rationalize bad leadership through urgency. I hear you, I honor that, but you can't just shame people. You can't just rationalize. There's some things you got to do. And if you don't do those things, maybe you're not the right person for the job. Because if you do that, the cynicism will get going and you will never get sustained change, right? And the reality is there have been some wonderful initiatives. Things come and go all the time. But the thing that kills them is the poor management, AKA poor leadership. They never even get off the tarmac, or they go and they die, right? Like I showed you at the beginning with the former superintendent we had. So let me just put this in shorthand. So if I'm an educator and I'm experiencing this change, and someone has come in with this thing, and we're going to do this shift, and we're going to use structural literacy, we're going to actually teach the kids to read, and we're going to go step by step. We're not going to skip anything. We're going to have curriculum that's aligned with research. We're going to have assessments that are formative in nature, not just cumulative, and they're going to be useful. We'll have the system laid out clearly. We're going to have all the materials aligned. We're not going to have a wait to fail. All the things. I'm an educator, and I'm sitting there saying, what does this mean for me? What I hear, I hear more than that. What I really hear them saying is, if I agree to do this stuff, and I don't have the materials, the colleagues who are aligned, the structures of materials, it's not a supportive environment, what does it mean for me? That's a longhand version of that doubt. And then our wheels start turning. I start thinking about my past efforts, right? And how things didn't go so well. My credibility is going to be at stake. And I might be insecure about that. The collegiality in the school building or in the district or in the central office or in the Department of Education or in the university faculty, our agreement about certain things, literacy and how to teach it being one of them, oftentimes becomes a proxy for a foundation of a relationship. We just agree on certain things. And so therefore we will sit together, we will argue together, we will debate, and we'll defend this stuff together. And I'm afraid to lose the relationships. And then also I just, I have to start over. Like just the time element of it and the peace of mind that I have when I know what I'm doing gets thrown out the window. And people have feelings about that. When you disrupt people's lives, they will have feelings about that. And make no mistake about it, that's what happens when you're asking people to change. So let's dig a little bit deeper. So who are we asking to change? I love working in Oakland. Oakland is it's the most diverse city in the United States. Try that on for size. And we're loud and proud about that. We have a rainbow of colors and languages, in Oakland, but let's look at the average teacher in the United States. 42 years old, in elementary school, more than likely that educator is a woman. And they're about, they're probably white, they've probably been married or are married, and they have their own kids. Oftentimes they're still living at home. Sometimes they're off in college or wherever else, and they're about 13. So that's the profile. Now I know that may not be your faculty, that may not be your grade level, but the reason why I put this up here is because sometimes we talk in theory, but we forget to actually look at people. It matters when you have kids at the house. It matters if you don't have a lot of experience. It matters. Race and class, all this stuff matters. Who are we leading? Now, your building will be different, but I just want to throw this out here because we have to be mindful of that. That's just the reality. So why should I, as a 13-year veteran teacher, or how about this? Why should I, as a leader, have to convince my teachers to change? Why should I, as a principal, why should I, as a chief academic officer, have to convince my principals to make the shift? So I was in that role. I was a central office person. I was also the principal. And I felt indignant. Oftentimes, my indignance was based on race and class. And I'm gonna own up to this. I'll come off screen to own up to this. So why should I have these stubborn white women? They don't want to listen. I'm trying to tell them I was an accomplished teacher, awarded, stuff, teacher of the year, and these stubborn white women, they won't do it. Why should I have to beg them to do what I think is right? I'm just gonna tell you, this is I'm saying the quiet part out loud. I would never say this to them, but at the time, that's what I was thinking. Is it because I'm a guy? Is it because I'm black? Is it because I'm this? Because my wheels start spinning. And what I had to realize was that if I didn't get that voice under control, I wasn't the right person for the job. Whatever that was, that was a me thing. Like I had to wrestle with my own stuff to be able to be the leader they needed in that moment in time. And when we're talking about leadership, which is what this session is about, it's you have to know who you're leading, not just what's on the outside, but know them well enough to understand what they need from you. All right. I don't know who that was for, but I'm just saying. Okay. Keep it moving. Whew, I didn't like that. Because sometimes we mask poor leadership with purpose. And just by being the loudest person in the room, just by talking about prejudice and race all day, by talking about the proportionate impact on African American youth, Latino youth, and poor youth, and that, okay, fine, but that is not a change management. Shaming is not a change management strategy. I'm here to tell you that you might get compliance, but you won't get buy-in. There's a big difference. So I'm sure many of you have seen this before, this old chart. I've used this several times, but I often use, and I'll be quick through this, I often use this to kind of frame some of the challenges that we face, because there's two kinds of challenges. Really, there are some very technical things that have to happen, and then there's some adaptive things that have to happen. So, for example, and you may not break out on this, but these things here, confusion, anxiety, resistance, that's common in schools, as all of you know. But really, if you unpack it, it's because we skip some of these things. We don't, like, people may not have the skills. So yeah, they're going to be anxious, or like they haven't been bought in. So there's going to be some resistance. And our schedule isn't aligned, our resources aren't aligned, our materials aren't evidence-based, whatever the resource. So yeah, there's going to be frustration. You see what I mean? So the question is, what do they need from us? Knowing that what they're asking, or what we're asking people to do, is to risk these things. And assuming that there's a certain amount of people who are with you lockstep for whatever reason, there are some other people who are kind of waiting, not quite sure and not quite convinced that this is the right way to go. So I wanted to map this out quickly. When we think about leadership, I'd like us to shift that to think about change management. Because leaders are, you're leading people away from one thing into something else. How do you manage that change? Well, you have to speak to the why. And people are in the building for different reasons. For some, it's a job, a mission, a social thing, a calling, whatever it is. But you have to know your folks and where they fit on these quadrants. I mean, literally map it out. I did that with my staff as a principal. I mapped it out. Who's where, who's here, and why. And actually, I use different terms, but I actually brought my leadership team in and mapped it out by skill and who needs what supports. Because people need different things depending on their mindset, their skill set, et cetera. Then that entire thing, that entire change management graphic that you saw, it happens in a circle of trust. If they don't trust you, you have to seriously consider if you're the right person for the role. Now, not everyone has to trust you, but you have to have critical mass to lead people, or have a plan to build trust and gain the trust. Because all these things happen within that. If there's no trust, then you have to fight these battles. And the technical parts are hard enough without having to battle these things. I know I'm moving kind of fast. I'll try to slow down a little bit. But I kind of want to move this along, if you'll indulge me. Okay. So we talked about change management, and I'm going to put a pin in it right here. And if you think about getting people to make a shift, more than likely, if you do a pre-mortem, right, if you look at it ahead of time, we know that usually things don't go perfectly. Usually, there's always going to be some hiccups. These are just some common hiccups that happen. There are lots of other ones, sure, but it's likely some of these things will show up. And so, having done a pre-mortem, you say, okay, well, I know that our central office is slow. The materials probably won't be here. Of course, you want to try to get them there. You want to do everything you can to get them there, but you know that things are going to be late and the assessments may not be right and the parents won't know what's going on and your new teachers are looking for where the bathroom is and like all the things. And so how do you, in that environment, keep people on board? That's the challenge. That's the leadership opportunity. And what's most important with this is laying out what are the issues that are most likely to crop up ahead of time. What are the roadblocks that you pretty much, if you've been there for a while, kind of know are going to happen? You know, in general, where the blockages are going to be, whether they're at your school site or central office or the assessment department or whatever it is. You can't wait until afterwards. A pre-mortem is much better than a post-mortem. You have to do a pre-mortem to figure out what's likely. It doesn't make you a worrywart. It just means that you're diligent. And so you would plan, okay, I know my context, and so I'm going to make sure the parents are not confused. I'm going to make sure that I'm going to, take these newer teachers and we're going to set up a system of support from them from the very beginning. When there is an initial implementation dip, how are we going to frame that? Because I know it's coming. It's something new. Usually new things, there's a dip, et cetera, et cetera. Make sure that you're not waiting until things go wrong to do an analysis. Have a plan, because that's good leadership. Keep on. So this is me. All right. So I think what I was trying to say here. So these are my babies, 3 of my babies. I have a lot of godchildren. These are my babies. And the reason why I put them here is because in the blink of an eye, kids grow up. In a blink of an eye. The one in the middle is now Dr. Weaver. She's off and doing her thing. And we are asking people to sacrifice time to learn something new. We're asking them to occupy heart space, to navigate the emotional component of things. And it's a sacrifice that you really can't quantify. Everybody's different, but you have to remember the human element. That's leadership as well, because in a blink of an eye, you saw that graphic about the age and the blink of an eye, you're a 25-year-old with a new baby, and all of a sudden you're 50. It happens if you don't know it. It does happen, right? So that's the sacrifice we're asking people to make. So with that, leadership then demands there's some technical must-haves. And and I'll make sure I put the slide deck in the folder for everyone. But there are some things you just got to have. You got to take these things off the table. You got to handle this. Whatever your role is, if you're a leader, there's some things you just have to do. I'm not going to go over all these things now, but you can look at this slide later. But there has to be these things, because otherwise you'll get the anxiety and the frustration of false starts. These are things. So I'm not going to talk about these things, but do your best to take these off the table. Okay. And I know that this in and of itself is a serious body of work. I get that. But there's more. You will not have a successful adoption. It will not be a sustained initiative. People's practice will not rudimentally change if this is all you do. And for many of us, I know this is a big deal. Like, this is a lot. But there's other stuff. There's the other stuff. There's the vision and incentives. The question is, what is going on here? What are we doing? Why are we doing it? Being able to answer those questions. And then on the right, these are the things that I want to point to today. Okay. We have to be, as leaders, able to make these cases based on the needs of our staff. You have to be able to make the technical case for why the shifts are necessary. If you have to send them to a conference to do it, if you're not the right messenger for it, whatever it is, if you pair them up, but you have, and I'll show you examples of this in just a minute. The moral case, for some teachers, that's all they want to hear. I mean, this is what's like for kids, and they go. For others, you say, listen, this entire institution is at risk. That includes your pension. Because we can't get kids to read, and we're spending 4 times as much money in special ed as we are in general ed. And we're upside down. It's like whatever the case is, maybe you show them the evidence. You take them to the Ed Trust West podcasts on Extraordinary and have them take a segment and present it during one of the professional developments with a partner and do a Venn diagram on what's in common with another group. Like, there are different cases you can make, but you have to do it repeatedly. It can't be a one-time deal. And this is a mistake that many leaders make. They make the case and say, okay, we're done, we got it. And then 2 months later, people are like, what are we doing? Why are we doing this? And sometimes that's the right voice. We have to be humble enough to realize that sometimes we're not the right person at the grade level, at the department, at central office, at the Department of Ed, at the principal level, at the whatever it is. Sometimes we're, for whatever reason, we're not the right voice. And so we have to be able to pivot and make sure people are getting what they need. That's a demand of leadership. I'm going to take a moment and ask you to read this and then put a response to it briefly in the chat. I'm going to call on Liza because you spoke earlier. Would you mind reading it out loud?
I can read it.
Sure, thank you.
Low reading achievement, more than any other factor, is the root cause of chronically low performing schools, which harm students and contribute to the loss of public confidence in our school system. When many children don't learn to read, the public schools cannot and will not be regarded as successful, and efforts to dismantle them will proceed.
You could have, and I look forward to seeing the comments in the chat, but you could literally have a staff meeting for 45 minutes and just discuss this, right? You really could. There's so much here. I look forward to seeing what you all are writing. I see reading is the root, public schools are bedrock. Thank you, Dr. Burke. Being a skilled reader grants access to all other content areas. So, I mean, can you imagine the rich conversations that you would have on this? And if this were the kind of framing, someone says a public health crisis, I would recommend you look at Dr. Tony Eiten's work, where he talks about life expectancy and relates to stress, chronic stress, cortisol pumping through your system, and how literacy is a big part of that. You can imagine this is a conversation waiting to happen, right? Leadership is allowing people to engage where they are and fully engage with their own sense of ethics and push those ethics towards a common ideal. Oftentimes we allow our ethics to be muted because of the realities of our challenges. But you want to do something from a leadership stance that starts off asking people to summon their best selves and to face the challenge directly, to know where they are. And there's implications to this statement. You all can see there's a lot of great comments in the chat here. Julie Wall, I think people are rising up. It's just taking a little bit of time, but they're coming. There are some, you go to the Ed Trust podcast, they're great. I'm not going to go there. Some people need the moral case. Well, I will go. So for some people, they do need the evidentiary case. Like there's 5 seasons of that podcast by now. Ordinary districts doing extraordinary things. They can just go and they can just, listen to it in their car. And some people, that's the case they need from their leaders. For others, they need the moral case. They need someone to point to a quote by Maya Angelou who says the elimination of illiteracy is as serious an issue today as the abolition of slavery. Like some people, that's all they need. You make the moral case, you cross that threshold, they open up. But if we don't, whatever their need is, whatever the case they need to be made, if we don't do that, it's a sign that you can fill in the blank. Teachers perceive that if you don't make the case to me that I need to be made, maybe it's not real. Maybe it's because it doesn't work. You can fill in the blank, right? But whether it's true or not, people will perceive our inability to do that as a positive affirmation of their worst assumptions. Leaders have to understand that. And that's why we have to make the case. And you'll notice that there's only one thing on here that's technical. That rubric we love to trot out, that's one. That's the just first thing. But the other cases have to make, if you want these efforts to be sustained in your district, your school, your state, etc., your grade level, you have to understand your people and you have to make the case that they need. And if we don't do that, and the inability to do that leads to what? Or better said, an unwillingness to do that is a sign that either we're stubborn or whatever it is, but it again, at a certain point, whether the reason why we don't do those things is almost irrelevant because people will perceive what they want to perceive, whatever their framing is. Maybe it's because it's no good. Maybe it's because you're a bad leader. Maybe it's because this is just another initiative that'll pass. Maybe it's because fill in the blank. But if you don't make the case that they need, it's a sign to them, whether it's real or perceived, that it's a gateway to cynicism. Okay, so let's keep it moving. I know time is precious. So to lead this shift, you got to have a baseline of technical pieces in place. So you got to, that graph that we showed earlier with the boxes, you have to just handle those things. That you have to take those things off the table. And then here's our challenge today, is that we actually have to listen to dissident voices. That's the teacher who, I hate to admit it, maybe I've been a teacher a time or two, maybe. But there's some folks you have to win over. And it starts with listening to them and understanding their skepticism or doubts or frustration or anxiety or whatever, because this is the 5th initiative in 7 years and I'm tired, right? Because if you don't do that, you get resistance and confusion. Change makers, leaders, understand, not the sign on the door that says I'm a leader, my ability to do these things the way they need it done. So you say, well, how is that possible? I don't, and I'm not just talking about your leadership team. It is your school team. It is your grade level team. It is whatever your team is, at central office, et cetera, at the DOE. You have to know them. And ultimately, you have to keep making the case in an ongoing way. Okay, so I'm going to go through this really quickly. Those are some things that we have to have. We talked about that earlier. But here's the disqualifying piece. Here's the landmine I want everyone to make sure you take from this. So whatever you choose, and we talked in our small group about which of those 5 elements we had consistently in our buildings. And one of them that kept coming up was curriculum, that we need better curriculum. Well, oftentimes, so I've spoken with CEOs of publishers, and I know that they give you what you want to make the sale. think that's their business. I get it. But there are certain structures in your building and in your systems that you have to be mindful of. And I'd like for you all to take a second. You see this chart here. This is just some school districts around the country. The minutes for preparation time, contract, not collaboration time, prep time. Meaning it's you and your lesson plan. There's no meeting you're being called to. There's no grade level, whatever that you get. None of that. It's you and your lesson plans. Go figure it out. How much time in your district do you have to prepare? Anyone? Please go ahead and put it in your chat really quickly. Love to see this. And people should see what their colleagues are saying. How many minutes a week do people get to prepare? On average, you see Oakland, 100 minutes. Chicago, 300 minutes. 200, 45 a day. That's a little over 260, 150, 30 twice a week. So that's 60 minutes. Virginia says 30 minutes twice a week. That's 60 minutes a week. Crystal. Okay, Crystal. Not that she is not enough. Okay, 225. Why is this important? 100 minutes during the student day, 300 minutes weekly total. Okay, so Teresa, for example, who has 300 minutes total, and let's say Virginia, who's 30 minutes twice a week, if they are both leaders and they're in charge of, adopting curriculum and that whole process, what they put on the table, what they propose, and ultimately what's adopted says a lot about their expectations for kids, for adults, and how in touch they are with people. If you have 30 minutes twice a week and you adopt some of the more popular programs right now that are really good, but so robust that they are not doable without 2 hours of prep time a day, having talked with them. What message does that send to the people you're trying to lead? I would suggest that they might begin feeling like a widget, or you're out of touch. And so we really have to be mindful of leaders about the materials. It's not just the materials are aligned to the research consensus. That's a necessary but insufficient component. It's that our structures support our educators in delivering that content consistently in a prepared way. And I know there are some publishers who hate me saying this, but they've got great products, but there are some of the biggest school systems in the country who shouldn't even look at it. If you got 100 minutes a week to prepare structurally by contract, and this thing takes 2 hours a day to prep for full implementation, what are you doing having that as a consideration? And so they're not going to put that on the side of the box. We had a California literacy committee, and superintendent was there for the state. And I said, this is one thing that you should do. Anyone that sells in our state should put that on the side of the box. To do this fully, it takes this much time. We have to be mindful of this, because if we don't, at the school level, the district level, and the state level, if we're not mindful of this, you lose all credibility, you lose all adaptive leadership grace out the gate, because you're out of touch. All right, let me hurry up and do this. What you got in here? All right, you don't need to see all that. So to wrap it up before we get to a Q&A, so you would have to be, and I just want to, we have to be willing to win over the technical voices from a leadership stance, and make whatever the case is that they need. We have to maintain and we have to make sure certain things are in place from a technical standpoint. And we need an environment where our systems, our structures are aligned so that we mitigate those feelings. And if we do that, change can be made. And that's the gist of all this. You have to have those things so that change can be made. And I'm going to close. Let's see. I did this because I wasn't sure which one I wanted to do. I will go to my man Curtis. So here. So let me explain this. The willingness to make the case I need to hear. This is a perfect example. So I have 3 things here, and I would share a different one for a different audience. My man Larry up here in the upper right-hand corner is a young student that I taught in my first years teaching. If I was teaching, if I was giving a professional development to, if it was to my mother, I would do Larry, right? Because it would just make her heart, because she probably sees me in Larry as a young kid and my brother. There are some people who I have gone to give professional developments before, and I've shown this one here on dyslexic criminals. They're in Scotland, so they're all white. They've got thick accents, and it shocks people. Oh my God. And I'm just being honest. It shocks people because, you know, America is kind of funky, and we kind of have a color of crime and a color of the incarcerated it's in our mind. It's in the ennui. It's just in the air, and it's intentional. That's part of the conversation. But to do that, it's like, yes, and if we don't do this, that means your kids too are at risk. So it just depends on the audience. And as a leader, you've got to be willing to engage people on their ground. The risk is we make assumptions that don't pan out. But you have to engage people. And maybe over time you do all 3. Let me keep going. So that's it. I'll go back and play one of them. But that's the end. I'll let Curtis take us out. Here, let me play. By the way, he's currently incarcerated in California, Pelican Bay, and he and a group of individuals who are in the same situation have agreed to join on to our literacy campaign with the Oakland NAACP from their position in jail, because they have a front row seat to the implications of these things. Let me just let you hear a little bit about Curtis.
I grew up in Oakland, California, with my mother and members of my immediate family addicted to crack cocaine. My environment consisted of living with family, friends, and homeless shelters. Oftentimes, dinner was served in bread lines and soup kitchens. Nobody ever told me that I could be a lawyer, doctor, or engineer. I mean, how was I supposed to do that? I couldn't read, write, or spell. I was illiterate. So I never cared about my community. They didn't care about my life. Everybody there was doing what they was doing to take what they wanted. Financial literacy really did rule the world. And I was a child slave to it, following the bad guy. At 17 years old, I was arrested for robbery murder. One day, I rushed to grab the sports page of the newspaper so my cellie can read it to me. And I accidentally picked up the business section. And this old man said, "Hey, youngster, you pick stocks?" And I said, "What's that?" He said, "That's the place where white folks keep all their money." And it was the first time that I had saw a glimpse of hope. But it was just a glimpse. I mean, how was I supposed to do it? I couldn't read, write, or spell. The skills that I had developed to hide my illiteracy no longer worked in this environment. So at 20 years old, I did the hardest thing I'd ever done in my life. I picked up a book. And it was the most agonizing time of my life. Trying to learn how to read, it was rough, man. It was a struggle. But little did I know, I was receiving the greatest gifts I'd ever dreamed of. Self-worth, knowledge, discipline. I was so excited to be reading that I read everything I can get my hands on. Candy wrappers, clothing logos, street signs, everything. I was just reading stuff. I was so excited to know how to read and know how to spell. The homie came up and said, "Man, what you eating?" I said, "C-A-N-D-Y, candy." He said, "Let me get some." I said, "N-O, no." It was awesome. I mean, I can actually now, for the first time in my life, read. The feeling that I got from it was amazing. And then at 22, feeling myself, feeling confident, I picked up the business section of the newspaper. I wanted to find these rich white folks. As I further my career in teaching others how to financially manage money and invest, I soon learned that I had to take responsibility for my own actions. True, I grew up in a very complex environment, but I chose to commit crimes, and I had to own up to that. I had to take responsibility for that, and I did. I was building a curriculum that could teach incarcerated men how to manage money through prison employments. Properly managing our lifestyle will provide transferable tools that we can use to manage money when we re-enter society, like the majority of people did who didn't commit crimes. Then I discovered that according to MarketWatch, over 60% of the American population has under $1,000 in savings. Sports Illustrated said that over 60% of NBA players and NFL players go broke. 40% of marital problems derive from financial issues. What the hell? You mean to tell me that people work their whole lives buying cars, clothes, homes, and material stuff, but we're living check to check? How in the world were members of society going to help incarcerated individuals back into society if they couldn't manage their own stuff? I now had an obligation to meet those on the path and help. And it was crazy because I now cared about my community. Wow, imagine that. I cared about my community. Financial illiteracy is a disease that has crippled minorities in the lower class in our society for generations and generations. And we should be furious about that. Our access to justice, our social status, living conditions, transportation, and food are all dependent on money that most people can't manage. It's crazy. It's an epidemic and a bigger danger to public safety than any other issue. A typical incarcerated person would enter the California prison system with no financial education, earn 30 cents an hour, over $800 a year, with no real expenses, and save no money. Upon his parole, he will be given $200 gate money and told, hey, good luck, stay out of trouble, don't come back to prison. With no meaningful preparation or long-term financial plan, what does he do? At 60, get a good job, or go back to the very criminal behavior that led him to prison in the first place? You taxpayers, you choose. Well, his education already chose for him, probably.
So I share that one only because I would likely share that with a high school audience, like a secondary school, and challenge their beliefs and assumptions about what kids are capable of. How could a person be a professor inside of prison but couldn't read outside of it? We'd go there. You have to know your audience and be able to give them what they need. That's the heart of leadership in kids, where they need to go. So I'll stop right there. I think we have a little bit of time for Q&A, Lisa, if that's correct.
Yeah, sorry, but time is technically over, but it seems like people are interested in staying. So maybe about 5 more minutes, a question.
That's good. Sorry, it was taking so long.
No worries, yes. It was all good, good stuff. There weren't too many direct questions in the chat. There was just mostly a lot of affirmations about what you were saying. But if people do have some questions now or just want to talk about a topic really briefly, please just unmute yourself and ask.
Well, listen, I want to respect everybody's time. I appreciate your attention and attentiveness and try to share what I could. But leadership matters. It always has and it always will. And there's no one archetype for leadership. It's just what the people need. And so whether you're a parent leader, a grade level leader, principal, superintendent in the Department of Ed, wherever you're at, university professor, there is a role for leadership and a need for leadership in buildings.